Welcome to the Cardboard Crash Course. My name's Ethan, and today we're learning how to play Root, a 2 to 4 player game of Woodland, Might, and Right. We're going to learn how to play this using the Learning to Play guide from the rulebook, so go ahead and grab that if you own the game to follow along. If not, it still should be relatively simple. But if you do have the rulebook, the Law of Root is the glossary of all of the rules, so if you need to pause the video for a moment to take a look, go ahead and do that too. We will just be following the base game's rules, so if you're looking for any specific faction rules, go ahead and check those out once I start uploading them if there's any interest in that. Leave your comment below if you'd like to see it. Otherwise, let's get right into how to play Root. First, you'll set up the game board in the middle of the table. There is a separate winter side for more advanced play, which we'll explain at the end of the video. But go ahead and start with the forest side up for your first game. Next up is choosing your factions. In a 2-player game, it's recommended to play with the Marquis de Cat versus the Erie Dynasties. But if you're playing in a 3-player game, a 3rd player may play with the Woodland Alliance. And finally, if you're playing with the full 4 players, which is most believed to be the best way to play Root, go ahead and introduce the Vagabond. Although I would only suggest giving the Vagabond to someone who really wants to be the main character. We're setting up for a 2-player game by choosing the Marquis de Cat and the Erie Dynasties, setting their score markers at the 0 space. You'll win when either player gains 30 points on the victory track or gains dominance, which is a separate victory condition that I'll explain in just a little bit. Next up is the shared deck. This is the deck that represents the native peoples of the forest, the mice, birds, foxes, and rabbits. You'll shuffle this and deal 3 cards to each player. This is their starting hand of cards. Don't confuse these with any cards used by the specific factions, however. Finally, we'll place the 4 ruin markers on the game mat, on all the spaces marked with the letter R. These simply remind that we cannot build in those spaces and cannot be removed unless the Vagabond is in play. So for this game, these are just permanently unavailable. Next up is the public item supply. Make this available for all players by putting the matching tokens on the matching icon underneath. Then make the 2 12-sided die included with the game available for all players as well. The final part of setting up the game is setting up the factions. So we'll start with these faction-specific components up here, and then follow this order in order to set up the Marquis. We'll set up first because we have the faction letter A, and then Erie will set up being B. If there was more players in our game, you'd follow then from there. It's also not a bad idea right now to read the Playing the Marquis section if you want to understand how to do well in your first game. I've saved their setup for individual faction guides, but as you can see, the Marquis de Cat begin with much more control over the game board than the Erie Dynasties do. But I wouldn't underestimate the Erie Dynasties if you're the Cat player, because they can take control very quickly. Now that we're finished with setup, let's talk about the front of a player board as well as the general turn structure of a turn. So on a player board, you'll see a crafted items slot if you're not the Vagabond, and in the Vagabond video I'll explain why you don't have one, as well as a couple special rules on the top. Some have even more, and these explain what the faction does in particular different than everyone else. You'll also have a good amount of tokens and or buildings usually. You'll go ahead and follow the setup rules for those in particular. And then you'll find Birdsong, Daylight, and Evening. What you'll do in a turn of Root is when it comes to you, you'll go from Birdsong down to Evening in order. As you can see, the Marquis de Cat have a single thing to do in Birdsong, and then once it gets to Daylight, they have crafting available, as well as many actions they can take, all in an order of their choice. Finally, they'll end with Evening, which in most cases is simply drawing cards and discarding down to 5. You may notice, as shown here by the Woodland Alliance, not every board will look exactly the same, but every board will have Birdsong, Daylight, and Evening to follow. The Woodland Alliance is broken down a little bit differently, but you'll still have the same general turn structure, and all you'll have to do is follow the setup and the special rules in order to understand how to play. Now that I've gone through turn structure, let's talk about the actions that every faction will have, being crafting, moving, and battling. In the game of Root, most actions consist on the map of the woodland, consisting of 12 clearings connected by these paths. As you can see, the suits of the clearings, bunny, fox, and mice, are the same suits that you'll find on the game's cards. Being a war game, it's important to know how to move along these paths in order to expand your control. There is no specific action structure in Root, so you wait till a game effect tells you that you can either move or you must move. In either case, you'll take any number of pieces from one clearing that you control and move them to another clearing. To do so, you must either rule the clearing that you're coming from or the clearing that you're going to. In this case, the Erie Dynasty player ruled the clearing he was coming from. Rule is determined by the number of pieces, warriors, and buildings combined, these square ones, that you have in that clearing. If you have more than your opponent, you rule that clearing. So in this case, the Erie Dynasties would rule both of these clearings, because even though the Marquita Cat have one piece in here, this is not enough to get around the 3 pieces that the Erie Dynasties control. There are also pieces in the game called tokens. These act very similarly to buildings, being placed in a specific clearing. However, they do not take up building slots, and they do not contribute to rule. So although a player like the Marquita Cat may use these tokens, or the Woodland Alliance may even use them to gain points, they do not contribute to anything regarding the rule of a clearing. As explained during setup, these different cards indicate the different residents of the individual clearings in the woodland. Birds are wild, however, because they live in the treetops. So in any case that requires you to pay a specific card, unless indicated otherwise, may be played with a wild bird card. Every faction in this game may craft these cards. To craft a card, that card must have crafting element symbols in the bottom left corner. This ambush card does not, so it can't be crafted, but it does have a use, as it will be explained later. Currently, the Erie Dynasties has 2 different choices to craft in his hand. One card that costs 1 bunny, and one card that costs 1 mouse. Keep in mind that these may be different than the actual suits of the cards, used in different abilities. The Erie Dynasties player will look at the board and see where his crafting elements are. The Erie is told that his crafting elements are his roosts, although the other factions may have a very different way of crafting. Currently, he only has 1 roost in a bunny clearing, which is giving him 1 element of a bunny. He can craft this card that costs 1 bunny, doing the effect here, although he would not be able to craft this card that costs 1 mouse, because he doesn't have a roost in any mouse clearing. Keep in mind that if he were to have 2 different cards that cost 1 bunny, however, he would only be able to craft 1 of them, since each crafting element can only be activated once per turn. The Travel Gear card is an immediate effect that lets him grab a boot from the public supply, place it into his crafted items slot, and then gives him 1 victory point, which moves him up to 1. This card is then discarded. This can be seen by the text as well as the bottom background. If a card, however, has a solid blue background like this one, you can instead place this near your player board, and each time that effect occurs, you can take advantage of it. The final action you can do on the board, no matter what faction you are, is battling. Here, the Marquita Cat would like to battle the Erie Dynasty that reside in the same clearing. You have to battle enemy pieces, and they must be in the same clearing that you're in. To do so, the Marquita Cat are going to roll 2 die. Once rolled, the Marquis will take the higher roll, and he will give the defender the lower one. The Marquita Cat in this situation produced 2 hits on his die, while the Erie Dynasties was given 0. However, the Marquis are limited by the number of warriors they have in that clearing. So although this is 2, he only actually produces 1. The Erie Dynasty does not have any ability to give him extra hits, so he doesn't get anything out of this. Pieces are removed by a player who controls those pieces, so the Erie Dynasty will take 1 piece off the board. Keep in mind that all the warriors in a clearing must be removed before the buildings can be during battle. So even if the Marquita Cat were to roll a perfect 3 here, he would not be able to destroy that pesky Erie Dynasty's roost. Some effects allow you to produce extra hits. Here, the commander for the Erie Dynasties allows you to deal an extra hit during battle. This is applied after the actual dice are rolled, so no matter how many that the Erie Dynasties produce, as long as he has any amount of pieces in that clearing, he produces an extra 1, even if he rolls a 0. It's also fantastic to catch your enemy defenseless, as the Erie Dynasties is right here. Now, even though you still have to roll the die, if the enemy is defenseless, meaning they have no warriors in that clearing, then no matter what happens, you produce an extra hit. This essentially makes it that you can take off a single piece even if you roll 2 double zeros. The final thing to understand about battle are ambush cards, which represent the people in that clearing's loyalty to protect you. To play an ambush card, you must be the defender in battle, and you play it before any dice are rolled. At the start of battle, the defender can play this to immediately deal 2 hits and then discard the ambush card. So in this case, if the Eerie Dynasty were to play an ambush card, the Marquis de Cat would have to remove 2 pieces. You can only play an ambush card if it's within the clearing that the suit matches. So this Fox ambush would only be able to be played in a Fox clearing. Lucky Eerie player. However, immediately after playing an ambush, the attacker may play a matching ambush, and remember, birds are wild, which cancels the original ambush, and you go back to rolling dice. You may not continue this back and forth. It is a single opportunity. Sorry, Eerie. Remember how I said there was another way to win this game other than victory points? Well, whenever a dominance card is discarded or used as a suit for any reason, place it near the point track. During any player's daylight, which is the majority of their turn, where they take most of their actions, you can instead take your marker permanently off the victory point track and place it on a dominance card. This can only happen if you have at least 10 points. Your victory condition is that victory condition instead of the normal 30 points. So if you feel like the only way to control the game is to control clearings, then choose the dominance over the points. Dominance mostly have to do with controlling a specific amount of clearings. So in this case, you win the game if you roll 3 mouse clearings at the start of your bird song, which is the beginning of your turn. So remember, you choose during daylight, and then you have to hold that until your entire next turn. If you do so, you immediately win the game. As we'll see in the Vagabond video, they're interesting in all parts of the game, including this, because if you were to choose dominance, instead, place that token on another player's faction board, and if they win, you win as well. Once you're done playing on the basic forest map, you can choose this winter map instead, with just a little bit of advancement. First of all, on this board, the river actually splits the forest, which is important for the Vagabond to know, since they can occupy the forest. And secondly, you'll notice that the clearings do not have specific markers, which are instead replaced with these. At the beginning of the game during setup, you will instead randomly place all of these markers. Once they're placed, you'll flip them over in order to determine what types of clearings each of them are. In this case, 2 clearings of the same type are right next to each other, which normally wouldn't happen on a forest map. Although the Marquis are pretty simple compared to some of the other factions, it's very nuanced how you play this game because all of the different factions play off of each other. Although you'll always be moving from birdsong down to evening, you might have some interesting different mechanics that pop up and many interesting choices. Remember, most factions have the abilities to move their pieces, craft cards, and battle other enemy pieces in order to gain those points. And that's going to be the major way that you keep other players under control. But each faction also has a very different way of gaining victory points as well. So although factions like the Marquis de Cat might slowly build up, the Eerie Dynasties have a way to shoot forward and then come back a little bit. Every faction plays very differently, so now that you understand the very basics of how to play Root and understand just how cutthroat it can be, go ahead and take a look at each of the factions' specific guides on the back of their board. I've been Ethan. Thank you so much for participating in the Cardboard Crash Course. Have a great rest of your day.